On September 8th, 2019, Ravens quarterback Lamar Jackson crafted a masterpiece in Miami. On the same day, Cowboys quarterback Dak Prescott played marvelously, but as to the metrics relevant to passer rating, objectively and significantly inferior. And yet, in a clear affront to both common sense and logic, John Q. Public is being sold on this idea that the same number should be applied to both performances. So in a nutshell, passer rating lies. Within the broad, complex formula, if any of those four metrics land above these numbers, it baselessly rounds down to them. For completion percentage and yards per attempt, any figure that falls below 30 and 3, respectively, is baselessly rounded up to those marks. What you're looking at here are each of the 24,492 instances in which an NFL quarterback attempted at least 20 passes in a regular or postseason game from the start of the Super Bowl era in 1966 up through 2023. They're plotted by season along the x-axis and by what their actual passer rating, sans artificial boundaries that serve only to deceive, along the y-axis. One natural area that might initially draw your attention is toward the very top, where more than 200 player games reside above so-called perfection. After all, not all quote-unquote perfect 158.3s are created equal. Not by a long shot. It's just too disingenuous to take two quarterback performances in which one clearly outperformed the other and relegate them both to the same number and the same word. What best illustrates that paradigm, at the very apex of this chart, north of 220 as the single most efficient passing game in NFL history, is that Lamar game from September 2019. Returning to his old stomping grounds, the South Florida native gets the fireworks started on a perfectly placed slant to Hollywood Brown that's taken the distance for a 47-yard score. The very next pass Jackson throws, an effortless flick of the wrist soars the ball nearly 50 yards downfield into the waiting arms of Brown, who takes it the rest of the way. Not even 11 minutes into the ballgame, and Jackson's completed all four of his passes for 140 yards and 2 touchdowns. Next time he gets his hands on the pigskin, he drives his team down to Miami's 33, where he tosses a dart to the end zone right in Willie Snead's breadbasket. After a takeaway sets the Ravens up in the red zone, the Dolphins dial up a 7-man pressure package on third down. With an unblocked defender screaming off the edge, a dead-to-rights Jackson retreats some more, decides to chuck the ball off his back foot into the end zone, and makes magic happen. A quarter and a half into this one, Jackson has completed all 9 of his passes for 204 yards and a quartet of touchdowns. His first drive of the second half, he methodically leads his team to the doorstep of the goal line, where he dabbles in some play action to hit Patrick Ricard for passing touchdown number 5. After leading a field goal drive on their next possession, that is all she wrote as the game's final quarter devolves into the Robert Griffin III versus Josh Rosen portion of the proceedings. With Jackson's day wrapped up, his completion percentage stands at 85, his yards per attempt at 16.2, and his touchdown percentage at 25, while not throwing a pick. It's called perfect, and in baselessly shaving over 65 points off what we know was his actual passer rating, it's called 158.3. But we know better. We know the truth. Conveniently enough to underscore the deceit, it's just a few hours later that Prescott finishes up his game, having completed 78% of his passes for 12.7 yards per attempt with a touchdown percentage of 12.5. It's of course called the same word. It's called the same number. How can we, as a society, let that be? They can't keep getting away with this. Both QBs cleared the upper boundaries in those 3 metrics, but the fact that Lamar did so by significantly more than did Dak goes completely unaccounted for. It's high time these best and worst performances get properly sussed out and distinguished. One of the more conspicuous observations up top that jumped out to me at the outset of having done the NFL a solid and correcting their thousands and thousands of decades-long lies was that each of the 3 highest games here were produced by former University of Louisville quarterbacks. Lamar Jackson's aforementioned September 2019 game sits atop the rest, with another of his Dolphin demolitions a few years later sandwiching at number 2 a 1967 Johnny Unitas game in Atlanta referenced last episode. But that is not it for Louisville representation among the zenith here. Coming in at number 19 out of 24,492 is a third former Cardinal, Teddy Bridgewater, who generated an actual passer rating of 187.7 in a 2015 game. And Louisville's still not done with their infiltration of the top 10th of the top 1%. At number 26 is a third Lamar appearance when he reached 183.1 in a November 2019 game. So that's 3 of the top 3 and 5 of the top 26 spots here comprised by 3 different Louisville alumni. As for the 2 non-Louisville games that constitute the rest of the top 5, that would be these games by, as surely anyone would have figured, Alex Smith and Nick Foles, both of which occurred in 2013 and both of which occurred in Oakland, feasting upon the generosity of a Raider defense that, in both games, allowed over 14 yards per pass, including scores on a full quarter of them. For Foles, that amounted to 7 touchdowns by the time the game was 2/3 over, while Smith dialed up a quintet of TDs, 4 to Jamal Charles to help him become the only back to ever catch that many in a single game. If you move your attention over toward 2023, as a Niner fan, I'd be remiss to not call attention to the fact that Brock Purdy authored not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, not 5, but 6 of the 14 highest actual passer ratings of that campaign. But it's the highest of the 6, the one at 167 and change, under which there's some true postseason wonder hidden. In the first playoff game of 2023's Super Wildcard Weekend, first-year starter CJ Stroud and the Houston Texans welcomed to town the Cleveland Browns. Stroud put on his lab coat, took out his scalpel, and performed surgery, dicing up arguably the league's top pass defense to the tune of 16 completions and 21 attempts for 274 yards, 3 scores, and no picks. It was good for an actual passer rating just north of 167, becoming the 5th player to ever do so in a playoff game, joining 82 Lynn Dickey, 03 Peyton Manning, 09 Kurt Warner, and 21 Josh Allen, all in the wildcard round. So Stroud, in his very first career playoff game, in his very first season as a starter, accomplished something that was only done once in the 20th century. The very next day, in the very same state of Texas, another first-year starter, Jordan Love, partook in his first career playoff game. A couple hundred miles north of where Stroud laid waste to the Browns, the Packers signal caller waltzed into Arlington and ruthlessly took the Cowboys behind the woodshed, saying, "Anything you can do, I can do," almost identically. He threw the same 21 passes Stroud did the prior day, likewise completing 16 of them, 3 finding pay dirt, and none of which were picked. Alas, the similarities end there, because whereas Stroud passed for 274 yards, Love only finished up with 272. In basically plagiarizing off Stroud's homework, Love too produced an actual passer rating just north of 167. In one weekend, a couple of first-year starters slinging it around in their first career playoff game not only increased membership of the Playoff 167 club by 50%, but did so on the back of near-carbon copy raw totals. Speaking of 82 Dickey being the owner of one of the best ever playoff games, you'll also notice that in the prior season, the Packers QB topped a 200 actual passer rating in a regular season game, when, from 1968 through 2002, no one else had a game reaching even 190. Then in 2003, Peyton Manning did so twice, once in a regular season contest and once in the aforementioned playoff game. At the time, that meant 2 of the 3 regular season games to ever top 200 belonged to Manning and Dickey, while the top 2 playoff games also belonged to the same 2 guys, one of whom was Lynn Dickey. And even to this day, along with Manning, Dickey remains one of just 2 guys who have authored both a game residing in the regular season top 10 and one residing in the postseason top 10. Not Brady, not Breeze, not Montana, not Elway. Manning is joined by Lynn gosh darn Dickey. Another game that jumped out to me was the highest actual passer rating game of 1999, belonging to October 10th Kurt Warner. And in fact, calling it the highest of just that season shortchanges him. 10-10-99 Warner posted the highest actual passer rating in a game since that Dickey gem nearly 2 decades earlier. But what's so captivating about this performance is that he reached a level that high despite having thrown an interception. This is the highest overall placement on this chart among games that include at least one pick, and by a significant margin too, besting runner-up 924-72 Joe Namath by over 10 points. When operating within the confines of the bizarro, artificial barriers, INTs really shine a bright light on just how flawed and ridiculous their presence is. They can be irrationally debilitating to artificial passer rating to the point that you could throw a googolplex of passes in a game with a googolplex -1 producing touchdowns, all from 99 yards out, but a lone INT on the other pass would render your artificial passer rating lower than the sacred 158.3 repeating posted by Dak in that 2019 game, and thus ineligible for the perfection label that goes along with it. 10-10-99 Warner's blemish results in an INT percentage of 4.35, which is an automatic deduction of over 18 points and is reflected in knocking his artificial passer rating from 158.3 down to 140.2. But not accurately reflected? Warner's completion percentage of 87, his yards per attempt of 14, and his touchdown percentage of 21.7, which are still able to propel his actual passer rating up to 187.4, a number so high that it in fact surpasses the actual passer rating from 28 of the 38 individual games that generated artificial 158.3s, among them his own contest from the very prior week. That's right, nearly 3/4 of all games referred to as perfect are in fact inferior to that Warner game, despite the INT preventing any chance at earning such a label. Interestingly enough, 3 months after his game that remains the greatest passing performance in NFL regular season history among those that include at least one interception, the former Arena Leaguer played in his first career postseason game and utterly dismantled the Vikings by completing 27 of 33 passes for nearly 400 yards, 5 touchdowns, and a pick. And that remains the greatest passing performance in NFL postseason history among those that include at least one interception. As for the 201 player games here with an actual passer rating above artificial perfection of 158.3, they're comprised by 110 different quarterbacks. 38 of them have managed to pull off multiple such games overall across their careers. I happen to notice good ol' Lynn Dickey, of whom we know about 2 such games, actually churned out 4 total. Curious about the other 2, it turns out they occurred consecutively in kicking off the '83 season. With my curiosity uncontrollable at this point, I checked to see if his 164.1 actual passer rating across the 2 games perhaps constitutes the greatest 2-game stretch ever. And, well, for a period of more than 20 years, it appears that it did, before losing his title to '03 Peyton Manning in the wake of his sizzling first couple playoff games. '83 Dickey still maintained the regular season throne for another 15 years until 2018 Pat Mahomes, by a hair-splittingly, excruciatingly close margin, beat him out by 1/4 of 1 point. Having also extensively pored over the top passing games from archaic days of yore, I can say with extreme confidence that, by actual passer rating, 164.1 represents the most prolific 2-game stretch with a minimum of 50 passes the NFL had ever seen across its first 83 years of existence. Accomplished by the seemingly ordinary, nondescript Lynn Dickey, who never made a Pro Bowl, never had a season with a passer rating topping 90, and barely reached 70 across the course of his career, yet is apparently the Dos Equis guy of NFL quarterbacks. Not only somehow managing to crank out 4 games surpassing so-called perfection, but all 4 telling part of a larger story, woven together like a tapestry. If you're wondering about playoffs specifically, there's just one QB, Joe Montana, who's ever had multiple games topping so-called perfection, both in the '89 postseason. Finally, if you'll direct your focus toward 2018, there's another stupefying relic way up high covered up here by Big Ben Roethlisberger. Ben's Thursday night evisceration of the Panthers was good for an actual rating of 196.8, ranking number 12 on the all-time list through 2023. So that's the kind of rarefied air such a number occupies. But there's nothing fascinating about that. After all, Ben's one of the NFL's all-time great quarterbacks. What is fascinating is the identity of the man hidden underneath, having posted a mark just 1/10 of 1 point lower. Unless you happen to specifically recall that specific game, you should go ahead and guess who it is. Congratulations, you're wrong. That's right. On September 30th, 2018, one Mitch Trubisky murdered the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and danced on their grave en route to a clean 354 yards and 6 TDs on just 26 passes. At the time, it was good for the 9th best single-game actual passer rating the league had ever seen. Mitch Trubisky. Some quarterbacks who have never had a game so high include Pat Mahomes, Aaron Rodgers, Dan Marino, Steve Young. Not even Nate Peterman did so. Combined with Foles, that also means the 2020 Bears simultaneously employed multiple signal callers who have produced games that rank among the top 10 or so ever. Some teams just get all the quarterback luck. For now, we'll press pause at sifting through some of the plethora of relics stemming from the greatest performances ever with the lies now corrected, because it could be fun to sift through some of the plethora of relics stemming from the worst performances ever with the lies now corrected. Thanks for watching Secret Base. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to our channel on YouTube. If you want to get a peek at even more stuff and see your name included alongside all these other very smart and good-looking people, subscribe to Secret Base on Patreon.